Salutations, everyone. Good day. Today we are going to be taking a look at the nuclear arms race that took place following World War II and going until the early 21st century. This was a series of events that was created and further fueled by the development, creation, implementation, and engineering of nuclear weapons. Now, whether these are atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, uranium, plutonium, hydrogen, they all fall into this same very big bomb category. These are weapons that can wipe out a city to some that could wipe out a small country. So let's get started. Our instance of nuclear weapons comes from the United States, and we talked about this in World War II lecture. In 1945, the United States successfully tested the first nuclear weapon. This was the Trinity test at Alamogordo Air Base. It was a small weapon, but it definitely proved that the concept was feasible. That same year, the United States would drop two of these devices in Japan, one on the city of Hiroshima, later, a few days later, on the city of Nagasaki. These bombs were used to end the war, and it was decided to use atomic weapons to end the war because conventional tacticians said it would cost the lives of about 1 million people to send in a land-based army and do it any other way. And after 1945, us using these weapons was a big surprise to everyone, because this was a weapon system no one else in the world had, or even could come close to using. So we felt very safe in the fact that we could develop a weapon like this and deploy a weapon like this. And as the Cold War began, we relied on the fact that we had this weapon to keep us safe from a Soviet invasion. That is until 1949, when the Soviets developed their first atomic weapon, and this is a model of that weapon. It does look considerably different than the little boy bomb that was tested at Alamogordo, but it proved that the Soviets had developed atomic weapons as well. This was a huge surprise because nobody thought that the Soviet Union would be able to build a weapon like this in such a short amount of time. It wasn't discovered until after 1949 that the Soviet Union actually had spies working inside the Manhattan Project. Stalin, in fact, knew about the Soviet bomb, the nuclear bombs being developed before Vice President Truman knew. With the Soviets successfully developing this weapon system, it made the United States government and people very, very nervous. And some argue that the arms race began here, some say it started in 45, but now started the question of, well, if they've got a bomb and we've got a bomb, then it's simple. We just need a bigger bomb than they do. And under the Truman administration, we start developing a new class of nuclear weapons, what are referred to as hydrogen weapons. Hydrogen weapons are fantastically more powerful, and deadly than a regular uranium or plutonium bomb because they detonate hydrogen ions. We're not going to get into the science of this. This is way too complicated. Just trust me, these are way more powerful. In 1952, the United States tested one of these weapons. The bomb was codenamed Ivan, and it was detonated in the Bikini Atoll. When this weapon was detonated, we didn't know how big it was going to be. Just like Alamogordo at the Trinity test in 1945, it was expected that this would be a 5-kiloton bomb. The results were way wrong. It was a 5-megaton bomb. That's 1,000 times more powerful. The Bikini Atoll, where they detonated this weapon, it doesn't exist anymore. In the pictures you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, in the top right, that was the testing of the first hydrogen weapon. And those little dots, those are warships, to give you an idea of how big this blast is. And to give you an idea of how unprepared they were, those ships would never be that close to a blast of that magnitude. Fortunately, no one on board was hurt or killed. There was a couple people who bumped their heads when the wave hit, but that was about the worst of it. We had developed a weapon that we felt the Soviets couldn't develop on their own. We had built this, we had made it, and we had made sure that the Soviet Union hadn't had people in this development system. We were fantastically security ridden with this, way more than Project Manhattan. The same England is going to develop their first atomic weapons at Montebello. This was from a joint research team from the British and us. It was an agreement that was reached shortly after the end of the war that we would help them develop the bomb, but not give them the direct instructions, diagrams, or materials to do so. And in 1952, the British were able to do this, create the first atomic weapon of their own. 2 years after the Ivan bomb was developed, and after the Bikini Atoll was destroyed, the Soviet Union would successfully test their own hydrogen weapon. And boy howdy, no one expected the Soviets to be able to build, develop, create, and detonate a weapon system like this in only 2 years. It really surprised everyone, and for a lot of people, this was when the Cold War and the arms race entered a new and very scary period, because both of us were able to build these weapons, and both of us were able to use and show that we could use these weapons. The United States would respond, and the Soviets would do the same, by deciding to just build more weapons. There really wasn't a class of nuclear weapons bigger than hydrogen weapons, and even today still that's true. We can make bigger hydrogen weapons, but there's no class beyond hydrogen as of yet. And there's also no reason for us to want to develop something that's so much more powerful than what these things currently are. That being said, both of us start developing these things, and that led to a lot of nervous people. The next nation that's going to successfully develop nuclear weapons is going to be the French. They're going to detonate their first atomic bomb in 1960, and 8 years later they're going to detonate their first hydrogen weapon. This is going to happen in French Polynesia. And I know this shouldn't be said, but of the pictures, this one is one of my favorite nuclear bomb tests. The mushroom cloud that was created was really surprisingly beautiful, but it is horrible. 1964, the Chinese are going to test their first hydrogen weapon. It was also a successful nuclear test, and this continued to make people in the West nervous, because if it was just the Soviets, that would be one thing, but the Chinese are communists too. And even though there were divisions that were starting to come into existence between China and the Soviet Union, for a lot of people, they just looked at this part of the world, saw both maps were painted red, and that was all they were concerned about. In the 80s, the tactic was developed, and this was an idea that was come across, to intercept and destroy an intercontinental ballistic missile. Now, you could drop a bomb out of a plane, but the faster way to deliver a nuclear weapon was because of a ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. This is a missile that you fire way up into the sky, actually into low orbit, and then it falls down onto your intended target. This can deliver a nuclear payload virtually anywhere on the planet in under 20 minutes. It's a fantastically quick delivery system of a horrible payload. And the United States tried to put together this idea called the Space Defense Initiative. It was later renamed the Star Wars Initiative by the press, and kind of Star Wars stuck. The idea of it was that you would put lasers on satellites and micro missiles on land-based systems to shoot down ICBMs before they re-entered the atmosphere while they were still in low orbit, so that if they exploded, then the people on Earth would not be harmed. This was a stupid idea that cost millions of dollars and proved just as disastrous. To give you an idea of what it's like to shoot down an ICBM, it's like you're driving a car on and you're driving in a car, and on the opposite side of traffic there's somebody else also driving a car, and you're driving towards each other, and each of you is armed with a tennis ball, and as you get closer you decide to throw the tennis balls at each other to try to get the two tennis balls to hit each other while you're both driving in the same direction. It's ludicrous, and this was ludicrous as well. England is going to develop their first atomic weapons at Montebello. This was from a joint research team from the British and us. It was an agreement that was reached shortly after the end of the war that we would help them develop the bomb, but not give them the direct instructions, diagrams, or materials to do so. And in 1952, the British were able to do this, create the first atomic weapon of their own. Even though the Star Wars initiative, the Space Defense Initiative, failed in the 80s, that didn't mean that other groups wouldn't try it again later on. In 2001, we see that there's a variety of space-based and land-based interception systems that would be brought into development in the United States and largely around the world to try to make sure that in the event that a weapon system was developed, that it could be destroyed before it hit a civilized populace. Um, Protecting against a nuclear weapon strike, though, is a violation of the SALT Conference and the Anti-Ballistic Military Treaty. And the U.S. came under a lot of scrutiny from a lot of different nations regarding this. In the end, though, we will see the United States and at this time Russia, because the Soviet Union doesn't exist after the 1990s, would enter into a new partnership that was designed to limit the nuclear weapons both sides had. It said that neither nation could have more than 1,700 to 2,200 nuclear weapons total. And this was a big cut in nuclear weapons because prior to this there were tens of thousands of nuclear weapons it was believed that both nations collectively had. Limiting these weapons made a lot of people much happier, but there's still the reality that these weapons are a very big, very, very dangerous system that could be used with horrible consequence. So, today we talked about the arms race, we talked about the building and development and kind of overdevelopment of nuclear weapons. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know. I'll see you later.